Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker, good to see you. Thank you.
You too, Jack. Thanks for coming.
So, in the last couple of days, we've really witnessed incredible history with the assassination attempt against former President Trump. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
I think shock, like most Americans, and just an immensely heavy heart, especially when you learn that someone had lost their life. And then second was to realize that one of our candidates for president was within millimeters of losing his life. Live streamed and live television. An assassination attempt in my generation is not something we've lived through before. And I think lastly is just a heavy heart because our rhetoric has gotten so divisive in this country, and to think that that now means life or death, that someone can raise their hand to run for president, whether you agree with that person or not, to think that their life is on the line. We have to change. And so I'm hopeful that maybe this can be a turning point for us. And then lastly, just incredibly thankful that President Trump is still with us and alive. And I think if you were like me and watched the RNC convention last night, even if maybe those that don't agree with Republicans or don't view President Trump as their candidate, you had to appreciate that moment in our country's history as he walked into that convention center with over 30,000 people cheering for him. And you could tell he and his family also felt that immense emotion of what they lived through that past weekend.
It was powerful.
It really was, absolutely, yeah.
So what did you think about the ticket? You're a Republican. What did you think about the Trump-J.D. Vance ticket now?
Well, I would say I was surprised a bit, but pleasantly so.
How so?
I think Senator Vance represents the next generation of leadership. I may not agree with every policy decision he may has made so far in his young career. We're from the same generation. He's a family man right now, raising children just like myself. In this day and age in politics, I think his path to get to this position and to be the VP candidate is incredibly unorthodox, and I think that's really healthy. He does not strike me as a yes person. He strikes me as someone that has his own opinion, incredible experience, especially around foreign policy, and his real focus on domestic policy, especially around poverty. And lastly, I think there's been so much focus, both on the Democratic and Republican side, about the age of our candidates and whether or not they're fit for office. And to have someone that represents the millennial generation as that next level of leadership to pass the torch, I think is incredibly positive.
Why do you think that's so important? Because before you said that, you're raising children, he's raising children. Why is that element
Your
so
perspective is so different when you're in the middle of raising kids. I always joke that my political bubble bursts every day when I get home to pick up a kid from school or from camp or coordinate their details. You kind of lose the ego that comes with the job, I think, sometimes when people get into political office and they live and breathe that job. And secondly, I think you're constantly making decisions that you'll live with and your children will live with, and it just is different. Your schedule cannot revolve around only the job. You also have to put your family first, and it is different. When you have grown children, I know that they are still a priority, but when they're still in your house, and I think that Senator Vance and his wife have a young child, I think 2 is their youngest of 3 kids, that will keep you quite busy and humble in many ways, and I think it does make a difference, but at the same time an immense sacrifice, and I think there's a reason why you don't see that many people in that role with children.
What do you make of the U.S. Senate race?
The one here in Texas? I think my prediction is Senator Cruz will absolutely win. And I've met with Colin Allred before. He's an incredibly intelligent, wonderful man. I think he's been great for the state of Texas. I understand why he's running, but I have not seen the level of enthusiasm that candidly I kind of expected coming into this U.S. Senate race beforehand. Maybe I'll eat my words come November, but as of right now, our prediction is that Senator Cruz will continue to be the senator from Texas.
Why do you think the level of excitement, why has that surprised you, and why is that so important in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that Senator Cruz does incredibly well is where he stands. There's no confusion on his policy positions. And I think sometimes, especially right now, where people do find confusion or they're worried or concerned about the state of the economy, where the world is headed, they find some comfort in knowing where Senator Cruz is. I think that leans more where the state of Texas is today. That doesn't take anything away from the positions that Colin Allred has put out there, the way he's running his race, the questions he's asking, the type of Texas he wants us to be. I have great respect for that, but I think it's really hard to unseat an incumbent senator like Senator Cruz, and he works hard, and it's hard to outwork somebody like that loves the job that he's in and arguably has done a great job for the state of Texas. There may be a lot of positions that people even in Fort Worth here that may not agree with me, but I think that it would be difficult to take him out.
You're mayor of the 12th largest city in the United States right now, and I'm wondering, there's a plank in the Republican platform that says, rebuild our cities, make them safe, clean, and beautiful again. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that plank in the platform as the mayor of the 12th largest city.
I say amen and use Fort Worth as an example. I mean, just last budget, our theme was simple. It was so clean, so safe, and so green. Americans want their cities to be back to basics. These are the things that really matter to them. Safety and public safety is at the foundation of that. Fort Worth has been one of the fastest growing cities in the country, yet one of the safest to raise a family. We also really pride ourselves in having a beautiful, clean city, and it's something we prioritize not just in our assets, but in how we spend your tax dollars in the city of Fort Worth. And I do think cities across the country have gotten away from that. And it's interesting that people are voting with their feet across the country. They want to be in a place like the city of Fort Worth that cares about the things that matter most to their families. And so I say to the Republicans, if that's a platform they're going to take seriously and an intent they're going to really push on if they were in the White House the next 4 years, I would love to work with that administration to do that.
I'm going to ask you about urban policy in, what's still a red county, right? How do you make it work?
Well, I think candidly, Republicans for decades sort of left cities alone, and they paid more attention to suburban voters and rural voters as their base, and I think that's a mistake. And I think the opportunity is to really pay attention. These are not partisan issues. These should be common sense, and frankly, Democrats should care just as much about them as well, but we've let partisan politics play into how you really govern places, and I think in the city we've done an excellent job. As a reminder, we're a city manager form of government. Sometimes it feels different. Maybe people perceive me to be a strong mayor because I'm very involved in the city of Fort Worth and I really care deeply about which policy direction we're going. But my job as chair of this board is to make sure this city looks like it is today and even better 10 years, 20 years into the future. And you can't do that if you don't invest in the things that truly matter. And so I think urban policy really should be the things that matter most to the entire country, right? It's great jobs, it's having safe communities, it's also investing in the right kind of infrastructure. Those are all things that cities that are run well are doing. And so our federal partners need to be doing the exact same thing.
And the city is almost really very close to Austin, which is 11th, and Jacksonville, which is the 10th largest city. So what do you think the difference will be for Fort Worth to leap ahead of Austin and Jacksonville?
It's quality of life, period. And I think one great example I can give you is our plan is to be fully staffed with the 4th Police Department by fiscal year 2026. I don't think another U.S. city can say the same thing.
What does that look like as far as number of officers, from where you are now to where?
Well, they're in the middle of their negotiations, so I'm sure Chief Noakes and our POA will have something to say about that. But you need to be fully staffed across the entire city. You also want to see NPOs where they need to be, your special departments, whether it's direct response or your crisis intervention team. All of these teams need to be working together, but it also comes from recruitment and retention. I don't have to tell you this, you do interviews across the state of Texas and really across the country, that recruiting and retaining officers has continued to be a really difficult issue, especially post-2020, post the murder of George Floyd. And in Fort Worth, I really think that we do an excellent job supporting the officers that we do have out on the street, making sure they have the equipment, they're paid well, and also have respect from community. And lastly, what does it look like to attract the next generation of police officers into the city of Fort Worth?
You touched on a little bit violent crime.
Yeah.
How has the city been addressing this? And there was just a very unfortunate incident on July 4th. 2 children were killed. So when you have headlines like this, and events like this, how does the city move forward and try to obviously prevent those if you can? And address the violent crime issue?
Well, it's heartbreaking, of course. The shooting that killed those 2 beautiful little girls was really attributed to domestic violence. And oftentimes half of our homicides in U.S. cities, that's oftentimes trended true in the city of Fort Worth, can be attributed to domestic partner violence. And we have no place for that in the city of Fort Worth. I'm incredibly proud of the partnership I've always had with One Safe Place and Safe Haven. My own family had experience with domestic violence. I do think you have to separate those issues from typical gun violence and homicide across the city of Fort Worth. But at the same time, those things hurt just the same. I was very proud of Chief Noakes, and he leads with his heart, even though he's in command of one of the country's largest police departments. He actually went to the funeral in East Texas to be with that family, because those murders of those 2 little girls reminds us our work is absolutely not done. I think you've seen us put the right level of investment through our CCPD fund, crime control prevention, and also the right resources within the police department to ensure that we're fighting gun violence, doing a lot of more prevention work. Our process and partnership with United Way and the 1 Second Collaborative, really focused on stopping gun violence before it happens, especially among youth, is showing good returns. But one murder is too many, and so really refocusing efforts, especially in the communities that are asking us for the most help. We have those hot spots, we know where they are, and sometimes you can't prevent these things from happening. Why someone would turn a weapon in a way that could kill 2 young girls is beyond me. But we have to learn something from it and move forward as a community.
But your murder rate's gone down.
Absolutely, incredibly proud of that, yeah.
And so let me ask you, because you also, the city made headlines recently with development in the Fort Worth stockyards, $630 million plan. So tell me a little bit about this plan and why it's so important to the city.
Well, it's phase 2 of what was already started with Majestic and the Hickman family through their Heritage Partnership. I don't know how much time you've gotten to spend in the Fort Worth stockyards. I actually was just there for the Major League Baseball draft on Sunday night at Cowtown Coliseum. It was a pretty cool feeling, Jack, to see how far we've come as a community. You have a world-class hotel and the Hotel Drover, of course, the renovation of Mule Alley and those mule barns that are now world-class retail and restaurants, and it's just the beginning. They've been tremendous partners in the city of Fort Worth. They have fulfilled every promise and then some, and they also really care about the history and heritage of the place that they've helped create. Now over 9 million visitors a year come to the Fort Worth stockyards, one of the top destinations really in the entire country, and we want to keep a good thing going. And I think this public-private partnership and incentive really shows that the city's committed to seeing phase 2 through alongside the private sector partners that are there. But they're not the only ones playing in the stockyards, which is quite exciting. You have other developers in the area that are interested in making sure the Fort Worth stockyards continues to be a top travel destination in the country. But I should also mention, now the stockyards is a place that you and I would go visit and go for dinner and go to see a concert. We'd kind of gotten away from that for a while. It kind of became cheeky and touristy, and that's no longer the case, which is quite exciting. But I don't think we've lost the authenticity. And this commitment to phase 2 is just a recommitment to making sure we understand what it looks like to hold on to the world's only twice daily cattle drive with the Fort Worth herd, and also remembering what that place really was, not just the state of Texas, but also to the economy across the country.
What about long-term impact?
It's
on growth,
yeah,
in visitors, but also residents,
yeah,
and perhaps jobs.
Well, I've always believed in working with Visit Fort Worth, who have a phenomenal team, by the way. In many ways, Fort Worth became a more well-known destination for business because people traveled here for leisure first. I don't know if you've seen the commercial that Visit produced called The Unexpected City with a voiceover from Jimmy Stewart. It's beautifully done. And in that clip, it refers to Fort Worth as the unexpected city. And I think that absolutely is true. People come here for the first time and they're shocked. They're surprised how much fun they're having, how beautiful it is, the trail system, the cultural district, there's something for everybody, the restaurant scene. And so because of that, areas of our city that we're incredibly proud to invest in, and the Fort Worth Stockyards is just one of those areas. Those are distinct areas to visit, to do business, to raise a family in. And I think that only contributes to the fabric of what makes Fort Worth such a special place.
I wanted to ask you about Hurricane Beryl. Obviously it didn't have an impact on our area, but when you look at the city of Houston right now,
yeah, and
there's still a week later, 100,000 plus people still without power. And I'm wondering, we have really bad severe storms in the spring. Something similar could happen. What is the city doing to try to prevent that?
Well,
if there is anything to say.
No, absolutely. I think first of all, it starts with really close partnerships with our provider here in the utility here in North Texas, which is Encore. I actually talk to Encore very often. They have great representation in North Texas. They're really committed. When we have storms come through, I get real-time commitments and checks on where we are, where our power outages are, any issues that we see. They work very closely, not just with our water utility, but also with Transportation Public Works on planning projects, stormwater projects, how they're impacted. So, because remember, it's not just your power utility you have to worry about. It's also your basic necessities, what your road systems look like, and also your water. These are things that you have to do over multiple years of planning, and it's expensive. So a lot of these big projects that really prevent the catastrophic from happening, you have to create better partnership, both with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Some of this is federal grant money. We've gone through a process recently on some big stormwater projects to prevent some of these things from happening. I don't think you can always avoid power outages, right? But I think the way we communicate with our residents, how quickly you can get their power back on, Some things like tree trimming that can be wildly unpopular in certain neighborhoods, now you're starting to see people go, oh wait, now I understand that tree needs to look a little funky so that that whole power line doesn't come down in strong winds or in a tornado. I don't pretend that we have the same level of natural disaster concerns the city of Houston does. So I'm not trying to spit in anybody's eye. And I think they've got foundational leadership in Mayor Whitmire, who's really trying to steer the ship and understand how did we get to this place where today you have over 150,000 people still out of power in the city of Houston. That's unacceptable, right? And I think they've got to hold people to account in a bigger way in the state of Texas. And I think you've seen Governor Abbott use some very strong language in the last 24, 48 hours since he got home from his trip to really point the finger at center point and ask the tough questions that need to be asked. But I'd be remiss if I didn't remind people, don't be a jerk. There are men and women on the line down in center point trying to put power back together and power back on. And we were chatting about this before we came on air, that they're now turning around to leave because their lives are in danger. People are at their wits' end. So how do we create the right kind of infrastructure changes? And we're doing those things in Fort Worth, and you see us prioritize it every single budget. You have to plan for the worst case scenario. And I think Fort Worth has done a great job in that.
My last question on this topic is really just when you talk about, trimming the trees and all that. Now, in the newer areas of Fort Worth, probably don't have power lines.
Yeah, they'll
right?
bury the
'Cause
lines.
They're
Yeah.
buried, right? But it does raise the question in some of these other areas, why are they planting trees under power lines?
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The
Yeah.
tree's gonna grow.
Yeah.
Why not do some other kind of, instead of a tree, bushes or something like that, so that this isn't an issue?
Yeah. Well, that's a hard issue, right? People love a beautiful tree canopy, and actually, on the other side of the environmental issues that you may face, the sustainability, you have to have a healthy tree canopy to really keep these heat domes from taking
Fair
over
point.
large urban areas. So it's a catch-22. But as you well know, if you see some of the pictures in Houston, these are 100-year-old established trees that came down and took down power lines. So they built the power line under the tree, right? And so to your point, why would you do that? They're going to have to pay some big billion-dollar questions about how to bury those lines across the city to keep this kind of thing from happening for themselves.
Fort Worth Mayor Mattie Parker,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Good to see you, Jack. Appreciate
Good
it.
to see you. Thank you.